Hi everyone. Hope you had a nice lunch break. It's gonna be an afternoon full of insights. We're gonna talk about DeFi. We're gonna talk about stablecoins. We're gonna talk about marketing. So stay tuned. And now I want to announce the first speaker, which is Angelo from. We built Degen Score, which was one of the very interesting tool for profiling Degen activity on chain, and yeah, he's gonna talk us through building apps for the terminal on chain and why it matters. A round of applause for him.
All right. Can you hear me well? All right. Cool. So just a quick intro about myself. So I'm Angelo. I'm one of the co-founders. Today it's Lighthouse. So we basically moved on a little bit from Degen Score. And I'm going to talk to you about something that's very dear to my heart, which is actually building apps for the terminally on-chain and why it actually matters. And I'll just spend like a couple of words about myself so you can understand a bit where my bias and where my bags and where my insights might come from. So I left Google back in 2018 to work in crypto full-time, moved to Germany because people told me it's the crypto capital of Europe. So I went there, found my co-founders. We built something called Dex Blue and Atomic Blue. And for those of you who have been around for quite a while, that was kind of an early DeFi exchange and aggregator. Then part of the team was acqui-hired by Jump Crypto. But my co-founders and I wanted to continue building, and so we went on and moved on to Degen Score, kind of an on-chain reputation project. And now we're building Lighthouse. Just for quick words, Lighthouse is a cross-chain portfolio tracker for pro people. So imagine you have assets on Bitcoin, EVM, Solana, Coinbase. We can basically aggregate it all in one. And it's a solution for mostly, I would say, whales and teams. But enough about myself. I would like to start kind of with a story. The story is basically how I met my best Etherscan friend. And it's basically 2020. So imagine, DeFi summer hasn't happened yet, but DeFi is starting to pick up. So people are starting to use Etherscan, try to understand how contracts work. They're starting to write each other on Etherscan. And I was, obviously, as many other people, were very deep into the thing. And I started collecting a list of addresses that I was really, really fascinated about. People that really know what they were doing, people that were very early on farms, people that were really doing very well on chain. And I really started developing almost like an adoration for some of these guys on chain. And at the top of the list, there was one guy, girl, well, back then I didn't know. But this one guy who was consistently better than anyone else. Always first on the opportunity. Imagine, if you guys remember, the Curve launch, the first kind of like Master Chef with SushiSwap, all these things was always there, 24/7, in the right contract, before everyone else, and I just grew very passionate about this guy. And interestingly, the story is not an on-chain story, it's actually a meet space story, as I like to tell, because I actually got the chance to meet the guy. And basically, we were building a product back then, and he joined our Telegram. I verified that this was the guy. And so I told them, man, if you're ever in Berlin, which is where I was living, please let me know. Let's go grab a beer. So this was 2020, still on-chain, and DeFi was still very early on. And one day he writes me, he says, man, I'm in Berlin. Let's have a beer. So for those of you who know Berlin, this is Rosenthalerplatz, and there's a small bar called Neue Odessa Bar. And so I told them, let's meet there. So I was going there to finally meet my Etherscan on-chain legend, at the top of the of my personal list of favorite addresses. And when I arrived there, I didn't expect what I saw. It was a kid barely out of high school, managing back then I think it was $15 to $20 million on chain, fully by himself, started with nothing. And we started talking, and he was telling me, yeah, like I had a crypto wallet before I had a bank account. So yeah, that's interesting. And he said, yeah, my first loan and every type of financial interaction that I've ever had, I had them, of course, in crypto first. And so we became friends, and this is probably today one of the most proficient on-chain traders. This was almost 5 years ago. And I think the reason why I wanted to lead with this story, it's because this really was the pinnacle, I think, of a new wave of on-chain natives coming and being onboarded into crypto. For those of you who remember, before 2020, people got into crypto in a very, very different fashion, right? You probably had heard of crypto on Reddit, you maybe read the Bitcoin white paper, maybe you got nerd sniped by a CryptoPunk manifesto or this type of things. And back then, doing crypto meant reading and maybe being a miner, right? That was as close as you could get to the idea of actually being in crypto, right? Running a miner, seeing the chain hum, the heartbeat of the chain. And then most of the day you were spending it on Poloniex, Bitfinex, BitMEX, you were talking on Reddit, and this was the experience pre-2020 for what it meant to be an on-chain native. But after DeFi summer, everything truly changed. There was a new wave of on-chain natives that actually onboarded in a completely different fashion, right? So they onboarded through MetaMask. They maybe had never even really understood what Bitcoin worked, but they were excited about Ethereum. They were excited about MakerDAO. And they really joined in a very different fashion. Their channels of communications was different. And they really saw crypto in a very, very different fashion. And I think what makes this kind of new wave that started in 2020 of people that really got onboarded natively into the chain is that these people truly understand digital ownership. Most of these people, to this day, they tend to have even more assets on-chain than they actually do off-chain. So you viscerally understand what most of your money and financial power actually lies on the chain. You actually understand what digital ownership means. Again, for many of these people, finance is by default on-chain. The idea that you have to go inside a bank branch, sign a bunch of paper to try to get a loan makes no sense to these people. It's not the experience that they know of. It's not how they got into the space. And last but not least, it might surprise some people here, maybe not others, but they actually use the chain. I think one of the biggest cardinal sins of working in this industry and forgetting to do is actually forgetting to use the chain. But these people, the natives, the people that got onboarded after 2020, they actually use the chain a lot. And I think that ultimately what makes Degen specials, or I use Degens terminally on-chain natives a bit interchangeably, right? But what makes them special, I think is also what ultimately makes crypto special, right? If you actually understand and you get digital ownership, then you truly appreciate what it means to have digital sovereignty over your own assets. You actually understand, you actually get it. And I think that by using finance, using the chain, paying for the products that the chain offers you, it's what ultimately pushes forward permissionless systems. And if our industry is not about digital sovereignty and about permissionless systems, then I don't know what our industry is about. So I think that the Degens and the on-chain natives truly embody a lot of the values that make our industry very, very special. And now, if we just take a step back, so now we understand who these on-chain natives are, how they came to be, and let's zoom out a little bit and try to understand where we are right now in the timeline. And I think that if we look and abstract ourselves and look at 5 years, the last 5 years timeline, I think we will remember the last 5 years not as the time where we onboarded billions because we didn't, or anything else, but the actual implementation, experimentation with on-chain products. The last 5 years has been a continuous trying and iterating, experimenting and trying to understand what actually works on-chain. We had the peak at 2021, this is a classic Gartner hype chart. We had the peak there of like expectation that on-chain was gonna change everything. It did not, at least not until recently. Then we had the FTX crash. People were very disappointed, very disillusioned back then, but the chain kept humming and the products kept coming. And I think that if we look at kind of the last 5 years, again, we've experimented and now we're kind of coming up the slope of enlightenment up to today. And I think I can confidently claim that actually on-chain is winning. And on-chain, not just with the on-chain natives that are getting more and more skilled, but I think also as a way of building products, the on-chain natives are actually winning, and across the board. So, of course, we had the very big and painful collapses of some of the biggest kind of CeFi players, so we really understood what we shouldn't do. But I think that on-chain is also winning in a couple of directions. So not only we had the rise of on-chain projects like PumpFun, Hyperliquid, Ethena that are now reaching Web 2 and global scale, but we're also seeing that the incumbents from the previous cycle, think Coinbase, Binance, Bybit, but also fintech incumbents like Robinhood are also converging to what is the on-chain way of building. So I really think that we stand now at a very interesting time where we've kind of understood that people want, and the best way to build the next generation of financial products seems to be on open chains with permissionless systems with digital sovereignty at the core. And I think for someone who's been in crypto for a little bit, I would say this is a very profound statement because it kind of happened faster than I even could have imagined, but we're clearly living in this reality right now, where maybe there's a couple of maybe names you might not realize, but ByReal, it's basically the on-chain version of Bybit that got announced. Supposedly also Binance is working on an internal version, kind of an on-chain version of Binance. Of course, they also have BSC, but like the idea is truly that both the incumbents and the new projects are actually going on chain. And I think it's also not just about the product. So we have the users, we have the products, but it's also about the culture of what makes crypto special is also going mainstream. I just have a couple of examples here. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with them. But true Degen culture is actually permeating into the mainstream, right? We have Elon posting our favorite NFT, Miladies. Even Vitalik actually accepted the Degens, so on-chain natives, and the kind of the cultural impact of the truly terminally on-chain is actually can be a force for good. So if you actually read the article about Degen communism, I would highly recommend it. He actually looks at Degen as a positive word of people that try, they're bold, they use the chain, and they take risks. We had Polymarket, which is now one, I think is a top 20, top 30 most popular website on the internet, just by sheer volumes. And then, of course, we have Pump Fund, which for better or for worse, you know, it's also clearly coming into mainstream culture. So I think that, again, really the on-chain native culture is winning across the board. And to kind of summarize a little bit the story so far that I'm trying to paint is that we're kind of out of the early experimentation phase, right? We had that phase, we have experimented, the tech was not good enough, the devs had to do something, the devs did something, and now we actually have on-chain products that are at Web2 scale. We actually have them. We also now have a new wave of users that, again, they started onboarding in 2020, they see being on-chain as their default way of being. They're here, they're hungry, they're also underserved. Oftentimes, they also tend to be fairly wealthy. So we have a great user base. And again, building on-chain is becoming a winning recipe. So how does this have to do with building apps for the terminally on-chain and why it matters? So I think that by defining the terminally on-chains and by helping and kind of going through what they really did well and what really makes them special, I think you now understand how valuable this group can be. They've also successfully built products that actually have managed to reach large scales. But I think there's one still missing link to the story, right? Why should today be building apps still for this group? Isn't this too niche? Isn't building for the natives and the people that are constantly on chain, isn't this a bit too small? Shouldn't we be targeting the billions of users? And I think the missing piece, it's a simple one. This is more my own personal speculation, so you're happy to disagree with that, and I would love to hear your thoughts after the talk. But I think the world will look more like us. And by us, I mean the on-chain natives. I think that the arc of history of technology is bending towards us rather than us bending towards the rest of Web 2. What I mean by this is that the further we go on and the further that products gets developed, generally speaking, we're talking about financial products, right? I think they will get closer to look like the stuff that we have been using for the past few years. So I'm willing to bet that the more we go on, people will have significant or increasing amount of assets on chain. I do believe that the more we go on, finance will continuously be on chain, and finance will be crypto. There will be no other way of doing great finance. And ultimately, I think that whether they realize it or not, so whether there is an abstraction layer, a UI that hides the stuff underneath, I think that if you actually look from the Etherscan in, the future average user of the internet will look like a Degen today, constantly using the chain, constantly pinging contracts, constantly having the assets moved left and right. So I really think that the world will continue to look more like us, as in on-chain natives, rather than the other way around. Of course, this carries some challenges, right? Not everything about, it's a 15 minutes talk, so I kind of sidestepped everything that is not good about degening on chain and losing money on pump fund live streams, so I'm not gonna go there, but what I'm just trying to say is that there are genuinely good traits about the people that are today on chain. There's genuinely great things that they're doing, and I think that the world will look more like us rather than the other way around. Right. So this was my talk, and maybe just one thing for us. So as I said, I'm the co-founder of Lighthouse One. So we're building kind of a portfolio tracker for on-chain people. So if you are on-chain and need to have this type of services, please come to us. And also we are hiring. So if you're a developer and you want to do something great in crypto and work with a small, self-funded and profitable team, that's us. So thank you very much.